Today we're going to be making the tier list for the Scoia'tael gold cards, as we just did the bronzes pretty recently. I think we'll start off by talking through the tiers again, and I think I didn't mention it last time, but again, we're making these tiers, we're talking about how the cards are played in the decks they go in, right? So if a card is generically good, it'll be ranked pretty high, sure, but if a card's good in a specific deck and that deck's good, and its card is not used outside the deck, I'm still going to say the card's good because it's good in that specific deck. So for these tiers, we have the excellent cards. These are played often or deck-defining cards. These are the gold cards you see either like played all across the faction in a whole bunch of decks, or they're the cards that the best decks in the faction rely around. So these are the excellent cards. Good cards are the ones that are played. They're good in these decks. Usually you want to play them, but they're not the deck-defining cards. Maybe they have good value, but they're not like the most standout thing in the deck, for example. Okay, cards are playable. You can consider them, but there's usually better choices. These are the gold cards. You might be like, well, I could try this one out. Maybe you'll give this one a shot, and this meta might be a little better than the normal choice. That type of cards, but they're not the ones you go to first for your deck. Niche cards are rarely seen but have their moments. These are cards that in specific metas or in certain matchups, maybe they have really great performances, but generally you don't want to play them, or they're the key cards or best cards in not as good decks. So maybe like your low tier decks, these are the key cards in that deck. The deck's not great, but I'll put it in here because it's actually good in that one specific deck, but the deck's not very good. Then we have the weak cards. These are ones they're not played at the moment and could be with a buff. These are the ones that you don't really want to play. Like you can consider them, like the okay cards you can consider, but these ones you don't really want to. So they just don't have the value most of the time. The bad cards are terrible and desperately need buffs. These are cards you don't play. And then we have the meme cards, which are, they're just meme. They're whatever. You can play them if you want to, but that's about it. And I'll note here again, obviously you can play whatever you want and people will try a lot of stuff. This is generally people don't play these if they're bad. Now, for the actual tier list itself, let's begin here with one that has fallen from grace quite a bit. Yeah, where is she? AER? I spell Erin. Whatever. Elf. 8. Where is she? Is she in 9? Oh, that's right. Sorry, guys. I always forget when we're in here, we have to search the tags for the elf tag instead of the deck editor. Elf 8. Faction. So she's the one that comes out of your deck when you do have 5 elves on the board. So she thins your deck out. She gives you a little bit of tempo at the same time. I thought she was an 8 provision. Maybe she got buffed to 7. But, yeah, so the issue with her is that elves are just not very good at the moment. Like, she wants to be in the swarming of the elves, and that's just not a great strategy at the moment. Yeah, she is an 8. I don't know why I couldn't get her. It is AEL. I guess it's AEL, not what I was saying. So, Erin, it's just not good at the moment, right? Like, the elf swarm deck, we talked about this with the bronzes. She's pretty good in the elf swarm deck, but that deck is so bad that you can't really justify playing her. And even in the decks that do play Elf Swarm, they're more so based around Heist and stuff that makes the row pay off, rather than summoning her out of the deck. I don't even want to give her niche just because her deck is so weak, and you don't even play her in the Elf decks that do exist, all the Deadeye Ambush decks, so I think she's going to go down here. I meant niche, I'm not going to put her in niche, I'll put her down here in weak. 5 tempo of the deck when you got 5 elves is fine, but the elf deck's so bad that if you are playing an elf swarm deck, she doesn't usually even make the cut because you want your provisions for other stuff like the heist and things. Next up, we're going to go right on to Aglace. I have to remove this here for a second. So Aglace here, 4 for 9. At the end of the turn, double the boost on herself. So this is really a hand buff payoff most of the time. You can boost it up in your hand. You'll get double the amount of boost, so it's a payoff card for hand buff. You can play non-hand buff with this. We'll mention that. You can, either with stuff like Thunderbolts or more commonly, not commonly, you can do it with Renfreeze and spawning the stratagems that boost her. Like there's a couple niche situations you can use her in, but most of the time she's a hand buff payoff. For hand buff specifically, hand buff we talked about earlier is not an ideal deck. It's not like the best deck, so I'm going to put her in niche for that. She is really good in hand buff, but she's not the best thing in hand buff. There's other cards to buff up. Usually you do want to have her in addition to a couple other payoff cards, and she's really good if you buff her up, so I think we'll leave her in niche because of that. Next up, we have a card that, on the other hand, is actually super good, in certain decks, and that is Angus. So Angus, is it Bri Cry or Bree Cree? It's probably Bri Cry or something. So he's 6 for 12, and for the rest of the game, your Deadeyes get +1 power. The entire Heist Waylay deck, a lot of it exists just to replay this guy. If you play this guy once or twice, your Deadeyes are way better. If you play him once, you're probably going to guarantee that you get at least like 9 or maybe like 9 more Deadeyes throughout the game for this. So it is really good value and it's carryover value. The Heist Waylay decks aren't the best decks in Scoia'tael. They're definitely better than hand buff. So I'm going to get this one in Excellent. Like, it's deck defining for those. You play the traps in those decks specifically just to be able to use him. I think he fits right there. And a card that's going right alongside him, definitely better in a better deck, but that's how tier lists work. Things that are not quite the same next to each other is Aquan. Symbiosis. Use all your naiads with nature. And then you spawn one Treant. Whenever you spawn Treant, it gets Vitality. This is a round-winning tool. If you do not kill the Aquan, the value from her round 1 just tends to dominate the entire round, and you win from her getting so much Vitality out. And the carryover on the natures on your naiads and such, it lets them trigger their abilities. It's very, very strong. Next up, we have Barclay, I believe. A dwarf guy. So he's 4 for 6. Deploy, give each dwarf 1 armor. If they already have armor, boost themselves by 1 instead. Now, dwarves are a pretty decent deck. Barclay does have synergy with them by giving them armor. If they already have it, you boost them by 1. Usually this is actually quite nice because it gives you some flexibility. Say your opponent's picking armor off, so Breu doesn't boost guys up, you can re-armor them, and then once they still have armor, get a boost. It's a nice effect. The thing is, there's some other options in dwarves. I don't think this is a go-to for dwarves, but I think it is a consideration in dwarves. So I think this is okay. You can consider playing it, but usually you pick something else over in the dwarf deck. But at 6, you can kind of consider making argument for it sometimes. Next up, we have Barnabas. Barnabas, how you have fallen. 5 for 8, boost an elf, dryad, or elf, dwarf, and dryad by 3. So if you get to target all 3 of those, you get 14 points for 8. That's good. The downside here is that you have to have exactly all 3 of those. It is a gnome, so you can play this in Harmony as a gnome triggerer, but really the condition, the point slam on this, the payoff is no longer really worth this condition. In a short round, if you get 8 for 8 on this, it's really bad. Even 11 for 8 isn't that great if you target 2. It's actually pretty bad too. You have to hit all 3 for this to be good. And that's just a little too specific, and there's better payoff cards nowadays, so I think he is a little bit weak at the moment. Okay. Next up, we have one that I keep forgetting. Brienne. So I'm writing Brienne, that's why I couldn't find her. So 4 for 6. If you have 2 more Dryads, gain Zeal. Damage any unit by 1, charges 3. It's total value 7 for 6. That is quite bad. It's actually terrible. And the fact that you have to have 2 Dryads to gain Zeal on this is just so awful. Like, look, compare this just to, well, I guess we'll just mention Dunka now. Dunka is a 4 for 7 that does 3 on Zeal without having to have 2 Dryads. Some other cards we got to just do 3 on Deploy. So this really just has no place in the current game. It just has no place. This is a terrible, terrible card. The problem is, like, the value's not there, and it can't be used as removal unless you already have setup. If you already have setup, the Dryad's probably have Symbiosis. You play Nature's Rebuke or Circle of Life or something. So this doesn't have value, and it doesn't have a situation where it's good. In order for this to be playable, like, would it be playable like 5 provisions? I don't even think so. I think this thing's like multiple buffs. I don't think it's unsalvageable, because ping damage can be useful for things like Shiru and Scorch, and Villain Triton if you're playing dragons, but it's just above the meme. It's pretty close to being in meme tier. I'm being a little generous here, just because I like her. Next up, we have Brahan. So 4 for 8, destroy the rightmost unit on a row with at least 5 units. And Adrenaline 3, destroy the rightmost unit on a row with at least 3. So he's a row payoff. If you can move the opponent's guys around, you can set this up so where he'll hit the biggest enemy unit, because whenever you move an enemy unit, it goes to the rightmost side of the row. So let's say they have a row of 3 and 3. Their biggest guy is like in the middle of a row. You just move it to the other row, goes to the rightmost side. Say the Guerrilla Tactics charge. You play this, boom, it's dead. It's all right. The movement-based decks, the problem with this is the movement-based decks tend to use other control tools than Brahan. For example, they'll be playing Milva because the offensive movement combos with her and they do damage for control and they don't need this. So I'm going to say this is niche. It does have moments. In certain decks, this can be good. So the biggest one here is if you're playing some type of Golden Necker deck that lacks hard control, Brahan is an option. If you're playing a movement-based deck, you can also kind of consider him. I'm going to say he's niche. He's very specific to what decks want to run him, but in those decks, he can do some work for you. Next up, we have Breu, the head of the dwarves. So 6 for 11. Deploy, gain an armor for each dwarf in your hand, and it usually gains an armor anyway because you are probably playing Mahawan Forge leader if you're playing this. And barricade boosts all your dwarves with armor by 1 and lose an armor. So potentially 9 points per turn. That is incredible. The fact the opponent has to get rid of this, they pretty much will always get rid of it, but it gets a good amount of points the first time you play it too, which is pretty impactful. Some big engine cards don't give you immediate impact. Breu does. Like if you play Breu onto a row full of dwarves, he's playing for like 15. That's pretty meaningful most of the time. And I think Breu is a really great card for dwarves. Breu is like super good for dwarves. He's like the reason you play the dwarves and do the spawning of the tokens and stuff. He pays it all off. Next up, we have Call of the Forest. Everyone knows where this card is going. Thankfully, got buffed at some point. So 9 provisions. Nature, play a non-neutral unit from your deck and boost it by 1. It tutors out of your deck and boosts the card by 1. Bam. Every deck that's not Renfree pretty much plays this. Consistency is king. Next up, we have Sarin. It's kind of funny. The cards that are the best I have the least to say about because of how strong they are. So Sarin, I don't even know why I bothered trying to press the whole name. We should have stopped at Sarin. 5 for 6. Deploy, lock a unit, move to the row. Sarin is pretty reasonable. I'm going to put him in okay. I think he's falling into okay for a couple reasons. The one is he and Moren both have a lock. Moren's a little bit more flexible because she has the damage option, so she's a little bit above him. And Moren is a dryad, whereas this is an elf, and a lot of decks want to play Isengrim's Council and have exactly like 1 or 2 elves, and you don't want this to be one of your elf choices for the Isengrim's Council, which holds it back too. And overall, I think it's okay. If you want to run a second lock or a lock, you can consider playing this, but I think generally Moren is better. But it's not a bad card to include if you do want that lock. Next up, we have Dana Provider, or the other form if you want to evolve her. So this is the hand buff type form. At the end of your turn, boost all your non-neutral cards in your hand by 1 if they don't have a category you control. This is pretty much played in Harmony. You use this because it has Harmony and it buffs up all of your Harmony engines in your hand, so you have a better chance of staying alive and gives you like carryover. If this is not answered, the amount of points you gain off it is actually kind of insane. Right? It's basically 9, then 8, then 7 if you have one of each type. Usually you have a couple of one types, you don't play that type or whatever, but the amount of hand buff carryover you get on this is insane just for the Harmony type decks. Because the other decks, you can play this in hand buff, but usually you don't. Usually you have other things you do for the hand buffing. And then if she gets into her second form, she boosts everything. I don't know how to pull up the second form here, but actually, how do we pull up the second form? That didn't work. Anyway, so the second form is you boost a unit from each category by 2. It's a payoff for Harmony. Really, it's just a Harmony setup. Harmony isn't the best deck, but I think she's pretty good. Do you play Harmony to play her? Not really. You play her in it. She's a relic to trigger stuff. At 6, she can be stolen, though, and enslaves a huge... Like, if they enslave this, you feel so bad. I'll put her in good. I like good. We might come back and move her later. Next up, we have... Which one is it? The Trap? It is the Trap. What is this one called? Is this Deadeye Ambush? Deception, that's what it is. It's for Deadeye Ambush because they make these tokens. So this is Deception. It is a 7 provision. Trap. After 3 turns, it spawns 3 Deadeyes. Now, that's 9 value, but you always play this with Angus, so it's really going to give you 4 power tokens, at least so it's 12 for 7. That's pretty good value, actually, and the fact that you know when it's going off is nice. It gives up rows, it fills in your rows. It's pretty strong. It's actually quite good in the deck it's in. So I'm going to give it a good rating. It's very good in those trap decks. It's very good in the Heist Waylay decks, which are pretty decent as well. Next up, we have Dennis. So Dennis here. So I just swap this back for a second here to Scoia'tael. So Dennis is 6 for 8, and he's deploy boosts adjacent units by the amount of their armor. Now, what you play with this is you generally either play dwarves with armor, but more commonly you're playing a Simloss deck that is taking advantage of the neutral card Armorer's Workshop. And then this is going to play and get you like 7 or 8 points on each adjacent guy. It's playing for like 22 points. It has a very, very high potential ceiling. This is a very strong finisher card. Those decks are decent. I think it is... He does define those. The question is, do I put him in niche? Because I don't think those decks are as good as like pure dwarves. Or do I put him in excellent? Because I think those decks are better than like movement and hand buff. It's not that common. You see a deck-defining card that's 8 provisions. I guess you do. I think Caranther was as well. Golden Child. Yeah, we'll put him up here. Very, very strong card for those specific decks, obviously. But that's how we rate the cards on the tier list. Next up, we have Dunka. 4 with an armor. She's 7. Veil. Seal Order, deal 3 damage. And at the end of your turn, she boosts a non-neutral in your hand by 1. So hand buff engine. She's got Veil, so she can't be locked. She's at 5 effective removal. So 5 removal would kill her. But that Zeal Order for 3 damage is kind of nice. Sometimes you just set her out there for the hand buff, and then sometimes you use her order. Overall, I think she's okay. I did recently try her out in like a Symbiosis deck, I think. But overall, she's kind of an okay card. If you're playing hand buff, she'd be a niche, but I think she has a little bit more reach than just hand buff, but not too much. So I think we'll just put her in okay. Next up, we have Ethline, Young Queen here. 6 for 11, and she spawns a Dryad, and obviously there's the evolving forms here. Not sure why Dana doesn't get her forms here. It must be because it's the 2 form cards, not the 3. So Ethline here, really you're playing her because you're in Devotion and you want this form 3. The form 3 is a 3-point per turn engine. Well, it's not. It's 3 points per special engine, per nature special. Actually, that's a lie. Per nature, because you can infuse the naiads with the nature tags. Usually this means about 3 points a turn in around 3. You can do even more if you're playing a Simloss or something. And this is a very strong card. It's immune, which means the opponent can't really interact with it outside like a Scorch or something. Gets you a lot of engine points. So this is the reason you play Devotion Symbiosis. I still think that I think normal Symbiosis is a bit like a little bit better. But she's the reason you want to play Devotion, if you want to go for that. Next up, we have Eldane. A little bit more specific than some of the traps. So he's 6 for 10, transforms all your traps into Deadeyes, and Devotion transforms your other artifacts. So if you're playing a Devotion, or just playing a pure trap deck, you just spam out all the traps, and then the opponent has nothing to interact with, and at the end of the round you drop him for a ridiculous number of points. Now, traps isn't a very good deck. What you can do with this instead that you see more commonly is people will use Waylay, or not Waylay, the Heist with traps. So they'll play Heist, and then Devotion will transform the 3 cargoes into Deadeyes as well, because if you're Devotion, it'll transform those too. So you see them occasionally for that. I don't think it's as much. You don't see like Angus decks. Like this is actually good for Angus decks and such. I think this just falls into the niche tier. It's very specific to trap decks, or those decks that are using him and more than the 4 traps for Angus, but he's pretty good for that, so we'll give him a niche there. Is this Elias? Yeah, Elias. So 6 for 9, deploy, destroy an allied unit, and spawn 2 Deadeyes. Now, theoretically, you could use this in an Elf Swarm type strategy or a Deadeye strategy. Its raw value is, if you had a 1 power token, 11 for 9, which is very bad. That's not good. Usually you're going to have to hit like a 2 power token, maybe a 3, like another Deadeye. And at that point, it's playing for 9 for 9. It's quite bad value. And usually the effect of spawning more Deadeyes isn't worth it because you're killing a token to get those 2 Deadeyes or another unit. So this is just really awful. It's going to go down here. However, if this card was a little cheaper, I think it might be a consideration. But at 9 provisions, there's stuff that's way better than this. Next up, we'll do Etriel, and we'll throw Morelga in at the same time. So Etriel is a 5 for 6, recently buffed. It does 3 damage. And if you have Morelga, it does 7. And you can see Morelga right here below her on her card, which is a beast. Etriel is an elf. Damage enemy unit by 3. And if you have Etriel, deal adjacent units by 3. So they're both 5 for 6. They both do 3 damage. and they both have an effect if you control the other one, so they're a paired card. Etriel and Morelga are going to go in the exact same ranking. Between them, they're just different. If you want to reach Tall Punish, you play not Tall Punish, a Tall Damage Cap, you play Morelga first. If you want Raw Value, you play Etriel first. And overall, then you're going to get 12 damage and 10 points. 22 for 12 is really good. It gives you control. I think these are both good. Morelga's going to be a little further down here. I think they're both good now. You can consider playing them. Some decks don't play them, right? But like the decks that usually do play them, like Renfree will consider them, and Devotion Scoia'tael, which is my favorite Scoia'tael deck at the moment, since Harmony's pretty poor, loves this card because this gives you reach and removal, and they're pretty good value, so they're quite good. Not amazing, but they're definitely good. Next up, we have Udora. So a pretty inconspicuous card when you look at her. 2 for 8 with an armor, sure, whatever. At the start of the game, you infuse a Zoltan in your deck with when this appears on the battlefield, spawn Udora, and boost her by 1 for each Zoltan. Now, so what this does is it thins your deck by a card prior to your first hand, and it gives you tempo on a card like Zoltan that just adds more tempo to it. I was saying Zoltan Warrior. I just said Zoltan for no reason, it doesn't help. Zoltan Warrior. Or you play on the one that gives you resilience, Zoltan Shive. So overall, she is amazing. She is just amazing. An amazing card. The fact that she thins herself out of your deck's fantastic. The fact that she gives you tempo with your big tempo plays or setting up resilience plays is fantastic. All kinds of decks want to play her. Like Renfree loves this for consistency. Like the dwarves love it. Super good card. Next up we have Fauve. Like I said with a lot of cards here, she has deploy play nature from your deck, 2 for 7. Play natures from your deck is very good because there's a lot of natures, and specifically, you can play like a removal and call the forest. If you're not a Renfree deck, you love having Fauve to find your call the forest, find your other nature cards. Super good. Next up, we have Feign Death. An interesting card. This used to be much better. So it's 13 provisions, it's doomed. Progress whenever you play an elf, and spawn a commando. So right away it spawns a commando, then it spawns 2 Deadeyes, then it plays a Waylay. This used to be the way you'd play Simloss Waylays. You'd play this, you'd spawn the Deadeyes with your next elf, you'd end up by playing Vanadane, because Vanadane would trigger on the last Waylay this played, and then you'd shuffle back like the extra Waylay, and then go Simloss with the extra Waylays for good value. That doesn't really work anymore. This is much more common if you're playing a Simloss Waylay deck. You're either playing like Precision Strike with more control, or you're going to play a deck with the Heist. And then if you're playing Heist, fitting Feign Death and the Angus and such is kind of impossible. So Feign Death's kind of fallen to the wayside. I think it's okay. You can use it. I just think that this is one of those things, right? You can use it for a Waylay deck. If you're playing Pure Elves, I mean, good luck, but I guess you can play it. I think it's okay. There's usually better options to use than this. Like I would consider Angus and the Heist much, much better, but it's not the worst thing. You can play this in certain decks for round control early, and its value is not amazing, but the way that you can combo with Simloss, there's a little bit of comp potential there. I think I like this in the okay tier. It's hard to say any of the scenarios are really weak. Next up, we have the Defender for the faction, Figus Merluzzo. So 7 for 9 with 2 armor. Defender, so he's 7 for 9 with 2 armor. I move south to the other row. It shows Rowdy Dwarf here because he used to spawn a Rowdy Dwarf when you played him, which was kind of nice for Dwarf decks, actually. But the fact that he moves himself is nice if the opponent's using Movement Punish, but that's very uncommon. Usually the opponent will either Purify Defender or Heat Wave it. Purify being pretty easy to remove this, and the movement doesn't matter. It doesn't have enough synergy with movement-based decks to just move himself once. Overall, this might be the weakest defender in the game. No one bothers with him just because, like, compare him to the other defenders, right? You have the benefit for Simulate in Nilfgaard. You've got the extra shield in Northern Realms. Monsters Cave Troll has the benefit, which is Sabbath. In Syndicate, you spawn 2 guys. You get 2 blocks, basically. The one in Skelgo you can bring back if it's Berserk is gaining more armor. Figus just is the worst one, which is a little unfortunate. I'm just going to stick him in okay. I don't know. You know, he's niche. Yeah. I don't think any normal deck considers running Figus. I don't want to say he's weak because the defender status is pretty useful. And if you're playing a deck that needs it, then you need it and you play him. But if you're playing those decks, you kind of have to play it, but I can't think of any decks that really do. Yeah, I'm just going to leave him in here. He's just not good enough for most decks to really consider playing. Next up, we have Filavandrel, so 5 for 11. Deploy melee, create a Scoia'tael special with a provision cost equal to its power. Why was that so hard to say? And then range is one that's equal to or less than its power. So what you do with this is you hand buff it up to 7. At 7 power, you make Frog Mating Season because that plays for, I think, 19 points of tempo, which is really great. It develops 5 bodies on the board. That gets you out to like your row stacking effects like Great Oak. Overall, this is a fantastic card. Is very important to some decks. Like Symbiosis loves this thing because you are spawning an additional nature card. It's either in one of these two. So this gets played in Symbiosis and Devotion. It is very good in there. I think we'll put him up here. I think Filavandrel's reached the excellent tier. He got buffed to 5 power at some point, which helps so much because you can also just raw make Rebuke off of it. Yeah, I think I'm happy with that. The card he replaced in those deck lists, though, is going to be Forest Protector. The Forest Protector is a 5 for 11 treant, and it plays a bronze nature from your graveyard. So you can kind of see when the buff to Filavandrel kind of took away Forest Protector's slot. They're both 11, they're both 5, they both make or play an extra nature, except with a hand buff, Filavandrel has more reach. So, unfortunately, Forest Protector is just not quite as good as Filavandrel. You can really see the comparison, right? They're both 5 power, they're both 11 provisions, like I said. They can both immediately play Rebuke, which is the 5 version one. Force Spectre is a little more consistency on what you can make if you go for the less than or equal to provision on Filavandrel, but you're not really doing that. You're going to buff them up to get a gold special or 2. You can even get to Call the Forest. So this is just okay because Filavandrel is better in pretty much every situation. You'd rather have Filavandrel than Great Oak, or not Great Oak, than Force Protector at the moment. Next up, we have our Elf Queen herself. Where is she? Franchesca. So Franchesca is 7 for 10 with Veil. That's an excellent stat line. Like, that's decently big. It can't be hit by 6 damage removal, and it's got Veil, so it can't be locked. Immediately very good. Whenever you play special, remove a counter 2. At 0, it spawns and plays a base copy of the last special you played. If it's neutral, also give it doomed. So this has some applications for, like, you can double Heat Wave, you can double Water of Broccolon, you can double something, right? There's a lot of potential there, but it usually doesn't work out that way in decks. Like, this doesn't really... The last time this was a decently played card was before they nerfed Spring Equinox. So Spring Equinox was like a 12 still because it counted itself and didn't have Doomed. You'd use it with Franchesca to make extra copies, shuffle them back in for sim loss, that kind of stuff. But now that's been nerfed, Franchesca just doesn't have anything good to copy. And at 10, you can't even like make specific Golden Necker decks off of her. So really, she's just going to go in the weak tier. She's a little bit hard to use. I'm not even going to put her in niche just because I haven't seen any decks use her at all. But I think if she did get a buff, specifically if she could fit in Golden Necker, you might see some action there. Because a double Golden Necker off of her would be pretty interesting. Next up, we have a card that was recently buffed. The free Exent. So 6 for 8. He's got Zeal Order, spawn a young Dryad on his row. Cooldown 4. Devotion at the end of your turn, reduce the cooldown of by the amount of vitality. So you play this guy, you get your young Dryad, get some vitality, you spawn a whole bunch of young Dryads. It was at 5, it recently got up to 6 power, and at 6 power in combination with a couple other changes to Devotion. I like the Ethne one. It's better. I actually don't know which one's better for the Devotion deck, Ethne or Phyrexian. I think it's Ethne. If you want to say these are together in the same deck, you can. I think you can play that deck without him, though. I wouldn't do it just because you're taking advantage of Devotion. You might as well play both Devotion cards. I'm going to stick him next to Ethne for now, because you kind of want Devotion for both of their effects. I might move them down to good, though. We'll see. Next up, we have Frog Mating Season. Not Frigg Mating Season. I'm not in Norse mythology here. So, Frog Mating Season, choose 2 units, give them 4 vitality, spawn a frog. The frogs speed up the vitality, although I don't show the token here. So, it's playing for 4 vitality, and 4 frogs, which is 12 for 7. That's just good raw value, like decent raw value. Pretty happy with that. And then also it should increase the vitality of your other cards that's already out there. It spawns a bunch of guys to the board, so row stacks for you to take advantage of that. It's overall just a great card. It does see play in several different decks. I'm going to put next to Filavandrel because you make it with Filavandrel a lot. Yeah, I like that. Next up, we have Gabor. Recently buffed as well. So Gabor is a 6 for 9. Deploy melee resilience and ranged immunity. And then whenever you play a dwarf, it gets a point. So the nice thing about Gabor, it got buffed to 6, which means that 6 in a dwarf deck, he comes down to 6 in an armor. That's pretty hard to remove, and he's got that resilience. Most resilience cards are very good. The thing with Gabor is you already have other resilience in dwarves, like Zoltan Shive is a little bit better, I think, because of the armor making it harder to remove. This resilience out of resilience engine though is pretty nice. I think the thing with Gabor that kind of holds him back is his immediate impact isn't as high as something like Zoltan Shive, and if you lock him, the lock carries over, which kind of does hurt as well, right? So overall, I think he's all right. I have seen, I think Golden Necker dwarves. I haven't played Golden Necker dwarves, but I think I've seen some of it. Yeah, I've seen a couple people playing it. I don't think this is amazing. I actually will admit here, I don't know too much about Gabor at 9. I haven't tried him out yet. We'll probably do that. Probably not a video on it because we have too many Scoia'tael requests right now, but I'll be trying him out. So this is one I will admit I'm not super sure on because it's a recent buff and I haven't tested it, but I'm going to put him in okay for now. Next up, we have Gayton. So he is very specific. 5 for 7. He's a Witcher. Move all other cards on his row to the other row and damage an enemy for each one moved. So if you're moving 8 cards, it's 13 for 7, with which is 8 damage, random damage. And you're triggering stuff that's movement based because he's going to move a lot of guys. Now, this is like a key card, super key card, and movement engine overload. And because of that, it's going to go in niche because that's not great, but it is a very good card in there. Next up, we have Gezros, a card that has seen some buffs. So it's 6 for 11, Witcher, and he moves, if he's melee, he moves ranged. If he's ranged, he moves melee. When he moves ranged, he boosts a random unit by 1. And if he moves melee, he damages a random enemy by 1 on the opposite row. The thing here is, those are both opposite row effects, or row effects. If he's at Adrenaline 3, he buffs or damage all copies. You drop this guy down. In a swarming deck, he moves ranged to get you plus 8 points. Next turn, he moves forward and does like 4 damage. Moves back again, gets you plus 8 points. There's a very high ceiling to Gezros. The Adrenaline 3 does hold him back, but the 3 turns is enough, and plus you can usually move your own guys. Like you can move him back melee, so you get the ranged effect each turn, something like that. Against certain decks, the 1 damage to the entire row is really strong. But overall, there's just better things to do most of the time. I don't think he's weak. I've used him. I think he's okay. Kind of like a Forest Protector. If you want to play a swarming-based deck, you can kind of consider the Gezros, but there's pretty much always better options. But he's not terrible. Like, you can try him out. It's not the worst thing. Next up, we have Herald Gourd. Now, this guy, we all know about Gourd. Not sure how we feel about the cap on him after all these years. But he's 3 for 7, boosts himself by the amount of special cards you've played this game, up to 12. 15 for 7 is a very good finisher. It's very good value. Actually, excellent value. And a lot of decks will use him. This is the crossover between Syndicate, so it shows only Syndicate here, but it's also a Scoia'tael card as dual faction. Overall, this is a great card. You see decks just built to maximize the number of specials just to play Herald Gourd. So a lot of decks you'll see like mid-range or like Symbiosis playing a whole bunch of specials just to trigger this guy. And in Golden Necker decks, he fits in as well, and those like to play him because they have a bunch of specials. So overall, really excellent card. He defines a bunch of decks. They're called Herald Gourd decks for a reason. Another deck-defining card here we have is the Heist. Actually, I wasn't supposed to say that. We spoiled it. It's 12 provisions. It makes 3 cargoes, and the cargoes replay an elf that wasn't played this turn. So it lets you re-trigger deploys, remove locks. It does give them dooms. You can only do it once per elf unless you're purifying them, but there are a ton of decks that only exist because of this card, and those decks aren't meme decks. Like, Waylays is pretty okay. You can do other stuff with this too. If you were going to play pure elves, like I said, there's better options than stuff like Erin. Like this is the better option, right? You're probably playing a whole bunch of things. You probably play both, I think. But this has actual uses at the moment. Let's put it next to Angus. They're for the same deck. Next up, we have, this guy's name, Trap. He makes a trap. I don't want to have to pronounce this. Let's go for it, though. I must be blind. We create a trap. Oh, he doesn't create traps anymore. That's right. They changed him. I think he's 8, and I think he is... Kind of wish there was a way to undo the thing without resetting it here. Color 8. I think he's 8 provisions. Let's check. We got changed to 9. This is the blacksmith guy. If you ever played Witcher 3, you know the guy in Novigrad who always takes your money. I remember that. Oh, I think no, that's right. They changed him to a 6 for 6, gave him a different ability. That's what they did. Yeah. 6 for 6. Whenever you play an artifact, boost the lowest powered unit by 3. 6 for 6, potential 3-point engine. Playing artifacts isn't like specials, though. Like, you can't play that many things to get extra artifacts. Really, you're just limited to Yorvith, I think. But overall, this just doesn't... Engines and traps just don't fit together. We talked about this with Elven Scout in the Bronze video. Traps are a no-unit strategy that then pays it off with Eldain. They are not an engine strategy, so this just doesn't fit with them. That's just the problem. I want to put him in meme. I don't think there's much hope here. Like, I don't think Traps will ever really want to play engine cards like him. I just don't see a reason. But here, Hatori, I don't see a reason you'd want to play him. Even in traps, like, you'd rather play another 6 provision trap instead of him, or you'd rather play something that takes advantage of having a bunch of guys out. This is just not really the way you want to play traps. It just does not synergize with the deck. Next up, we have Ida. 6 for 6 with Purify. A lot of factions have that, and it's usually decent. Range is 3 Vitality. So overall, you're either getting a 6 for 6 Purify or a Vitality. The issue with this is that you already have the Purify Bronze Elf. That's 4 for 4. And the real issue here is the decks that want to play Purify. Dryad's Caress exists, right? Dryad's Caress plays 6 for 4 if you have a Dryad, and it purifies. 6 for 4 is much better than 6 for 6. I think overall, she is a little bit... I think she's a little weak. No one plays this. Like, the problem isn't that she's a 6 for 6 Purify. We've seen those in other factions. They can work, right? You have Kurt. Kurt's pretty nice. You can get the bounty option. In Vampires, you have Queen of the Night. That one's pretty nice, too. The issue with Ida is those factions don't have a good 4 provision, like, Purifies. They do have some, right? You do have stuff like the Salamander one in Syndicate. You have the Dominance one in Monsters, but the issue with Ida is that there aren't decks that want to run Ida. The decks that want the Purifies tend to be like Symbiosis or Harmony, and they have other ways to purify, either via units or via specials that synergize with the decks better. So Ida's just kind of left out of most of the decks, and then there's now obviously Neutral Peller. And unlike those other decks, right, we talked about Kurt, for example, Bounty is just a much better payoff for the non-purified choice than 3 Vitality. And the bleeding is much better for Vampires. So she just doesn't quite have the value for her alternative to Purify, and there's better options for Purify. Next up, we have Yorvith. Let's do him first. 6 for 9, and he moves a trap back to your hand, then plays a trap. So you could play the same trap again. You could play a different one, a little bit of mind games. So really, his value is 6 plus the trap's flip effect. Flip effect, we're not playing Yu-Gi-Oh! The trap's spring. Ambush. Ambush is what it is. Now, that's kind of okay. This is a very specific card, the traps. We're going to say traps. Where's Eldain? Put him next to Eldain. You can use Yorvith for his own deck, where we talked about... in his own deck, you can do him with the Hostage Taker, and he helps boost up the top Hostage Taker really tall, so you can like seize 10 power cards and stuff. But that's not the greatest deck. It's definitely a niche deck. I think he fits pretty well in the niche. Same thing for his Gambit, which we'll show quickly here. If you have 4 more traps in your starting deck, play 2 at random. If you have 6 or more, play 2 of your choice. Now, 12 provisions for a double tutor sounds okay. Traps do want to have a lot of traps, but after the rework where traps will spring if you play them next to another artifact, playing 2 can be kind of a detriment. You do have to kind of like space out a couple of units in there. This is one reason I consider not putting this guy in the meme tier, is because you do have to kind of play a couple units with traps, but this is not the type of unit you want to play with traps. You want to play like the elves that do damage and spawn dead eyes and stuff. So I think this actually just needs buffs. Like, I think Gambit is too bad at the moment. Like, I don't even think I've seen some trap players. I haven't seen Gambit in traps. Like, you'd rather play Heist because it'll get you 3 traps or artifacts to transform. It has Echo and his other utility as opposed to this. So I think really we need to buff this thing up. Next up, we have Isengrim. Yeah, actually, I'm going to put this in weak. It's not as bad as these guys. Isengrim, Philo Tiarna, 6 for 8. It boosts all your elves by 1, and whenever you're playing elf, it boosts himself by 1. So he's got good deploy value on a wide board, a little bit of engine with him. Overall, he's pretty solid in the elf decks. I'm going to put him in good alongside this. Like, it's pretty good in the Waylay decks because you just boost all the dead eyes you spawn with him. So overall, he's pretty solid for that. Isengrim's Council, speaking of Isengrim, 8 provision special, look at the random dwarf, druid, and elf from your deck, and play 1 and boost it by 2. It is a specific tutoring. The nice thing about this is it's going to buff up your elf, and we talked about previously why you only want to play a certain number of elves. You'd want to play like 1 or 2, like either Simlos or Simlos Philavandrel. Sometimes I guess just Philavandrel. That way you can guarantee you get the elf of your choice because those are very impactful effects. Overall, this is not as consistent as Call of the Forest, and a lot less decks want to run it. So it's mainly just played in decks that have the Philavandrel here, or decks that are wanting a bunch of natures, but it's still good. It's still very good in those. Let's grab Gourd and Gourd decks, usually your only dwarf. I'm going to give it good. I'm going to give this good. I think it's a very good card. It's close to excellent, but I think it's a little bit too specific for me to put it up here. And usually, yeah, I think I'll put it in good. Like, now that Bountiful Harvest is at 5 provisions, you have more ways to buff this guy up without needing the council. So I think we're going to leave this here. But I can see the argument to put it in excellent tier. But I don't want to make excellent tier like all the cards that go in the good decks. Next up, we have... Oh, what is your name? Ethline. So 6 for 9, boost the unit in your hand by 4 if it's not neutral. 10 for 9 value is bad, but you're going to play this on Torque because it's hand buff. So it's doubling up the hand buffs. I think this is just going to go in with other hand buff stuff in niche. I don't think... Here's the thing. Some decks have options for cards, right? Like, so for example, take like Symbiosis or Dwarves, right? There's going to be some Dwarves that are good, some Dwarves that are okay, and some that are like not so great, some that are like maybe weak. The thing with hand buff is all of the cards have to be in the deck because there's not only so many of them, so they kind of all go in the same tier. So that's going to go here. Next up, we have the Dusk aspect, Lake Guardian. Harmony also triggers a hand in deck. Usually you play this as your finisher for like 17 or 18 points, kind of like Herald Gourd. It's not as great because the opponent can interact. For this to get really tall, you kind of need your chameleons to live. But overall, it is a great card for Harmony. Harmony isn't amazing at the moment, but I think this is one of the reasons you'd want to play the deck, so I'm going to give it up here. Is it deck defining? I mean, it is the payoff card. I think I'll put it by Gourd. They're pretty similar, just Gourd's better and more flexible. And then we have the scenario, the mysteries of Lochfian, is it? Yeah, of Lochfian. This is the Harmony scenario. As prologue, spawn the Lake Guardian, Dusk Guardian, Dawn Inspector. You can read through all this here, but basically it spawns the big token, and then it gives you more points on each of your guys, and then it triggers all your harmonies with the last chapter. So overall, it has a very impactful effect. This is the harmony card. This is why you'd want to play harmony, really, most of the time. Did I have the wrong picture here? I apologize. I have the 15 provision one. It's 14, which you can see here. But I must have forgotten to update this card. What I had to do is I took all the cards from the game files, but those don't get updated with the balance councils. So I had to manually go back in and find all the cards that had been changed at any point in any balance council and like go snip their new images. And I must have missed this one. So sorry about that. But it's 14. But I think it's excellent. Harmony isn't the best deck, but it's not terrible. Like Harmony is actually like a kind of a playable deck. It's not a top tier Scoia'tael deck at all, but it's not a bottom tier. Like hand buff and the movement engine overload traps, I all think are worse. So I'm kind of happy with this up here. It is deck defining, but this deck's all right. Next up, we have the Horn. Once again, this is one we haven't tried out too much after its rework. Not rework, it's buff. So it's 7 provisions. Used to be 8. When your opponent passes, boost adjacent units by 4. Now, and Spring is boost adjacent units by 3. This is just a mind game card. If the opponent down 7 points, do they think you have a Horn? If you do, they pass, you win. Do they think it's a Serpent Trap? They pass, and they're good. So, a lot of mind games with this one. We haven't tried it out too much. Unfortunately for it, it's 8 for 7 is not great value. So the value has to be meaningful, as in it gets you like round 1 or 2 points. This has to be around 1 or 2 the opponent passes type of points. It is a trap, but the traps don't care too much about it. I think we're going to have to leave this in weak still. I think. I have not had any experience with this as buff state, so if I'm wrong, please tell me. But I think it's still weak. Just looking at it. Mahawan Pass, on the other hand, is not weak at all. So this is a 10 provision resilience. It creates a dwarf, giving it 4 armor. Dwarves generally have armor-based effects, so this gives the dwarves some extra value, gives them some protection. And then it has order, spot, and play tempering. That's a great carryover. It plays an extra special. It's a nature. Overall, Mahawan Pass is a top tier card, I think. Super strong. A lot of decks love this. It just gives you resilience. The resilience is the best keyword in the game, so giving it resilience is nice. It also has synergies within the faction for being a nature and a special. Giving the dwarfs armor, a cherry on top for all that effect. Next up we have Molina. Pretty straightforward one here. So 6 for 6, that moves a unit every turn. Can move your units, can move enemy units. This is a great card for movement-based decks. Unfortunately, movement decks aren't very good, kind of like along in the Gayton line, I think. She's okay. I don't think movement is that impactful. If you need movement in Scoia'tael, you just play Guerrilla Tactics. You have a leader charge for it and don't need her that much. So I think she's pretty niche, but in those specific decks I want to keep moving every turn, she's alright. But I wouldn't say she's alright in those decks. In those decks, she's really good, I should say, because it gives you a lot of synergies. Next up, we have Mullane. 4 for 9, that does 4 damage or 1 damage to 4 units. 8 for 9 value is so bad. Like we see there are cards that do 4 damage, usually 7 provisions, and they still don't get played. So she is so bad. She has to be buffed. Like, not just buffed. She has to be buffed multiple times. But she's not hopeless like I think this guy is within his deck. Mila Sharpshooter is next, so she has whenever a unit is moved, she deals damage to it. She deals damage to it. And then summons herself from the deck. Then she's got this order to ping it for 1 damage and go back in the deck. She is a deck-defining card for the movement damage decks. Those decks have kind of fallen off. They used to be a lot more popular. I'm going to give her a niche. Those decks I don't think are very good just because the hyper control, like control heavy decks in Scoia'tael have really fallen off from Milva and really just embraced Renfrey. like Renfrey with all the damage and precision strike, just tends to be better than her. Or you can go heavy on like waylays, like a waylay deck. You can go just and do like guerrilla tactics. You can just do like mid range, has enough control. Her control decks just aren't really cutting it anymore. She is deck defining for those decks, though. I just don't think they're great at the moment. Same thing with Milva. She has regular Milva, I should say, immunity, which is nice. Whenever an ally unit moves, boosts self foe, and she is amazing in the engine movement decks, like kind of like Gaten. You have her out, you Gaten move 8 units, she has +8, Gaten does 8 damage, but that deck, again, I don't think is really that high of a tier deck. It's a really fun one, though, if you want to give it a shot. Next up, we have the Morana Runestone. 5 provisions, great. Yeah, I'm not going to bother reading it. You all know what the Runestones do by now. If you don't, you can read this. But all the Runestones are just meme cards. They're too random. It's an alchemy. There's no alchemy synergy in Scoia'tael. So, no. Just don't. Just don't. Next up, we have Moren. 5 for 6. Melee, give a lock. Or melee do 2 damage, range give a lock. Like I said with Sarin, we kind of mentioned her. You have 2 locks within the faction, which is very unusual for golds. Nilfgaard's the only one that has multiple locks, I think. But unlike Sarin, the 2 damage means that if you do play her melee, you get 7 value instead of 5, which sometimes is the difference maker, that 2 extra points you can get, because the movement on Sarin usually doesn't matter. It only matters if you're removing a row-locked card that they would then purify, but then they just won't. So you don't really know when that pays off, but I think Moren is a little bit better, and the fact that it isn't an elf also helps, because like I said with Isengrim's Council, you really just want to have those couple elves and everything else not be blocking the council, targeting your good cards. So for that reason, I think Moren actually falls into the good tier. I think she's good if you want to run a lock in the faction. Not every deck wants to play a lock in the faction, but if you do, I think she's the one you want to go for. Maybe she also falls under okay, kind of like here. She is better, though. Yeah, she does get played. We'll put her up here. She does get played. Next up, we have Monroe. Monroe's pretty cool. Seal Order Transformer of Rowdy Dwarf, which is the token. Well, I almost said like Tolkien, like Lord of the Rings. Been reading too much lately. 6 for 11. And he can spawn your tokens into Dwarf Berserkers, which gives them an extra 5 points if the armor wears off fully, which is really great value. Super good. This is a very strong card for dwarves. However, dwarves don't always run it because you can do stuff like the Simlos Workshop combo instead. You have a long round from Brewer, so it's kind of an option. I think it's going to go in good. This is a good card. It's good for dwarves, but dwarves don't have to play it. I prefer playing it over some of the other options, but you do have other choices like the Simlos Dentist, that kind of stuff. So overall, I do think it kind of fits in here in the good tier. I see what I did. So let's just do a quick edit here. I did add the 14 provision. I did add the 14 provision mysteries. I just forgot to remove the other one. We can do that real quick here. So we already talked about mysteries. Just going to drag the 15 one out real quick. I probably forgot to edit that out, so sorry. I'll drop this up here. We had it before. Novigradian Justice. Now this is an interesting one. So Justice is 9 provisions. There's the Cleaver's Muscle. Plays a Bronze Dwarf or Crown Splitter from your deck. This is also a dual faction card. We're just going to talk about the Scoia'tael applications, which means you have to have a Dwarf because there are no Crown Splitters other than Cleaver's Muscle, which you're never going to play. So if you already have a Dwarf, it spawns the Cleaver's Muscle. This is a good card in Dwarves. It lets you find your Dwarves, lets you row stack a little bit, and lets you, yeah, like I said, the row stacking is kind of nice. You do see it outside of Dwarves sometimes because of the value from it. Like you get 6 power card and a thin, which is nice. I'm gonna stick it in good next to Monroe. I think it's good. Don't see it too often outside of the dwarves, just because the only other deck that really wants to play, like, you can play the Bronze Dwarf package. We talked about the Bronze Dwarfs. You can play the Bronze Dwarfs 4-version package, and then play this. The deck that loves that's Renfrey, and this is a special, so you can do it. I think it's just overall good, though. Next up, we have our guy here. Another movement dude. Is this Percival? Pauly. It's Pauly. So Pauly is 6 for 6. deploy move in order to give 2 armor. There's much better movement cards. We've got 4 for 4 on the Vria Dragoon we talked about already. That does damage too. This is just terrible. And unfortunately, I don't really see a world where this gets played, because you already have 4 provision movement, so this would have to be much higher value, or getting value from the armor. I think this is actually going to fall in the meme tier. I don't see a use for this. I don't even see, like, if you buffed it to 4 provision gold, okay. If this was a 4 provision gold, it might be okay, because of Dragoons and the 2 armor synergies. But that's never going to happen. So I think for now we're going to leave him in meme. And then we have 2. Next up, we have our boy Pavko. So 5 for 8 with Harmony. That was added a little while back. Order range, deal 1 damage. And if you have only non-neutrals, deal 2. So this is cooldown 1. It's potentially 2 damage a turn. Unfortunately for it being Harmony, the 8 provision slot is a little bit contested, because in Harmony you have really high end cards. We talked about this already with Dana, with Mysteries. So you have really high end cards, and you don't have much room for the middle provision cards, and you're already going to have to play Dusk, and you're going to have to play Percival, and you're probably going to have to play the Wandering Treant, whatever it is called. Not the Wandering one, Weeping Willow. So it's kind of hard to fit. Same idea with Barnabas here. So I think he just falls into okay. No, he's going to be weak. He's weak. I think he needs our power. 5 power engines tend to just die. It's a double engine, though, with the Harmony, but I still think it's a little weak. Percival, though, is actually quite good. Percival is quite good. It's Harmony 2, and the fact that it comes down at 4 with 2 armor means it needs 6 damage to remove, which is nice. Harmony 2 is worth quite a bit over the course of the game. I don't think it's a deck-defining card for Harmony, but it's good in Harmony, so we'll just drop it in here. On to another trap here. This is the Pitfall Trap. That's because I spelled it wrong. Why didn't it show up? Ambush, the opponent plays a card, face up, split damage equals provision cost. So you can do a bunch of damage with this. And then if you bring it at 6 random damage, you can actually just play this to kill 6 power cards sometimes. If they play a 6 power engine and it's the only thing they have, flip it. This is one of the traps you can play with your Angus as well. Overall, I think this card is going to go... Where did we put... It's not as good as Deception. But here we do have to consider the Angus deck being pretty good, where you'd want to have the 4 traps. I think because of that, it's not going to be a niche. Is it? You have to play it, so it is kind of played. I'm going to put it by here. We'll put it up here for now, and we'll come back to it. Next up, we have Prism Pendant. This is a good, interesting one. So Prism Pendant has, whenever you target a unit with a special, it gets Vitality equal to cost. And we target an enemy, give it bleeding. So the Vitality one's really what we care about here. If you're targeting things with Orbs of Insight, with the Frog Mating Seasons, which is a nice one, you get a whole bunch of Vitality out, and you need the frogs to trigger it. You need ways to use the Vitality or really long rounds. Now, this is pretty awkward to use. This is really only playable in Golden Necker, because Golden Necker can play the artifact and then trigger the Orbs of Insight to get you a bunch of Vitalities on units. Other than that, it's not great, but we've played Prism Pendant Golden Necker like 25-50 before or something, so it's not the worst deck out there. That was a couple months ago, though, so we'll have to give it a shot again. But overall, I can't, as much as I do enjoy that deck, I will not rate this higher than niche, but it's not a bad card. You can do a lot of stuff with Prism Pendant. It actually has a very high ceiling, which you can tell by the vitalities on it. Very high ceiling, but it's a very tricky deck to use. So I think we're going to leave it in niche. Next up, we have... Oh, who are you? The one I never play that everyone else does. Quarkx. How do you spell her name? Is it A? Quarkx. Okay. So 5 for 11 Harmony. We play Relic Spawn and play the Convergence, which will then trigger all of your harmonies. So you play the leader, then you play the leader token in Harmony, and then boom, you get another one. You can play the Dana afterwards then for the third relic, or even Unicorn Chironax. We can go really hard on the relics. No one plays Torque for this, though. I think he's the last one. That's an option. But really here, it's a good Harmony card, but I'm going to stick it down here. I don't play it. And so I know I'm not the only one who doesn't play either. It's an option for Harmony. It's pretty good in Harmony, but there's other cards you can play instead. I really think this should be up here. Dana does deserve to be up there. We've made our adjustments. Next up, we have Reordain. Reordain is fantastic because if you play him next to a trap, he plays an elf, and next to an elf, he plays a trap. And you can do both, so it's potentially double tutoring to replay this thing with Heist, the cargoes. Overall, this is one of the best cards along with Angus in that deck, which I think does warrant him to be up here. It's just such a strong effect, even outside of the Angus Waylay decks. If you ever do, like, if traps ever are viable, he's amazing in them. Next up, we have the Sabertooth, a card that has fallen off quite a lot. So Sabertooth Tiger, 7 for 9. It transforms into the Stealth, which is the artifact, which is nice for the no unit decks because it lets you play a unit that's essentially an artifact a lot of the time. And then if any unit's alone, it does 2 damage to it at the start of your turn. So the opponent has to play around this. They have to put units in the same row. You can move them and stop it. Overall, though, that deck's not great. I actually haven't seen it at all, I don't think. I've seen traps more. So I think at the moment, we're actually have to call this guy weak. I think it's a little weak at the moment. The idea is there, but a lot of decks will spawn multiple units at once, and then he just does nothing, which is a little unfortunate. So I think he's going to have to... I think we have to consider him weak for the moment. I can see the argument for niche in those decks, but even in those trap and no unit decks, like I haven't seen any of them at all. It's one thing saying that deck's pretty rare, but it's good in that deck or defines it. It does very important things for that deck, the no unit deck, but I haven't seen one at all. So like I can't really rank it above this, I don't think, honestly. Next up we have Say Synthesis. 8 for 9 with immunity, and it has an order to remove immunity till the start of your next turn. No one will ever click this order. Like, it used to be you could click the order and it'd be till the end of this turn, so you just store all of your boost points on this thing, and then it would get immunity again. The fact that you have to wait a turn, no one uses this because there's literally no point. It just makes it vulnerable to damage. So, the only reason you play this, though, is because it is a dragon, which is important. If you're playing a dragon deck, there are, 4 dragons with lineage? There's Akfist, there's Say Synthesis Blaze if you want to run her, there's Philantretenmerth, there's Murgatabrake. I think those are the ones with lineage. So, actually, we can just check. Yeah, those are the ones with lineage. Those 4. So, adding Say Synthesis to your deck essentially gives you 4 extra points because it's going to go on the other dragons. Now, is that worth it? You're essentially paying a 12 for 9 with immunity. The points are going on other cards, which you do want to protect those other cards, but overall, this is a dragon you usually see cut in the dragon decks. I'm going to give her okay. You can play her in the dragon decks. Usually there's better options, though, but sometimes you just want to have that 12 power Philantretenmerth with all the dragons. Next up we have the deer. The deer. Salve Anabde. Salve. Yeah, we're not pronouncing this one correctly. I just always call this thing the deer. Anyway, boost an ally by 5 when it enters your graveyard, transform into Unity. Then in Unity, after 2 specials are played, it comes back. This is a Prism Pendant synergy card because it goes on the Prism Pendant thing. Obviously, you can do that. However, it's just not. It's not very good. It's the thing. Like, there's much better things to do with Prism Pendant, and that's even like stretching the specificity of cards. I think this is bad. Yeah, I think it's bad. I have tried this thing. I think it needs a buff. It really does. Like, the 3 points, sure, it comes back 3 times, but it's not like something like Flying Redanian where the condition's easy to meet. You have to play at least 2 specials, which means 6 of your specials have to be used to get this thing back. It can be banished from the graveyard. Not 6, because the first time you play it's on the board. So like 4. Yeah, I'm just not a fan of this. A card I do have a lot of good faith in, though, is Saskia Commander. Now, she's not just limited to Harmony, although that's where you mainly see her. You can play her in movement decks as well, because there's a lot of movement package cards you can play that will just come out with her. So she has more than one use. And if you want to play like a pure dragon deck, you can use her to thin your dragons out as an extra one, but usually Renfri's the better choice than doing that. So overall, 4 for 14 with immunity. And if you have at least 10 different primary categories in your deck, you summon a random bronze non-neutral every 3 turns, and on her to play as well. She is a deck-defining card. She is very, very strong. I'm going to stick her to the Harmony cards, although she doesn't have to be played in Harmony. You can play other decks with her. Next up, we have regular Saskia here. Dragon Soldier, so you get to pick whatever you want with her when you play her. You get one of these guys, one of the 3 tokens the faction has access to, other than Wandering Treant. And then you just get a special on order that you can play the next turn from Saskia. Now, some good value here. It's almost always done with the tempering, or not tempering, not tempering, I was reading the wrong one. The Waylay, because you get extra Waylay that way. And the 3 damage is usually better. It's 6 value on that one as opposed to the other ones. The Dryad's Crest is also 6, but it takes a little time. Although the Young Dryad token is smaller, so usually you want the Waylay one. She's an option if you want to play dragons, kind of like Synthesis Blaze, appropriate since they are the same person, but you know. Anyway, on to Shiru, and we all know where Shiru is going. Shiru destroys all other units with power equal to his. Yeah, this is one of the biggest blowout cards that exists. Shiru is very, very good. Shiru is very good. So Shiru is the reason a lot of decks exist. The Guerrilla Tactics leader buffing this up. You can do damage with Precision Strike to set it up. So many decks love to use Shiru. And it's just, in those decks, I mean, you build the decks to have access to this blowout card. And it is fantastic. So Shiru can't be below excellent, I don't think. It's so impactful. Next up, we have a trap here. What's this? This is Serpent Trap. Yeah, Serpent Trap. 7 provisions. When the opponent plays a special, destroy the highest power enemy, and Spring, destroy the lowest power enemy. Now, this actually is a decent trap. I want to put this one next to this one. I think this one, I'm going to move this one down. I don't like it as much as the other ones. I don't like it as much as the other ones, but you kind of have to play it in the deck if you're playing the Angus deck. So, Serpent Trap is nice because the opponent is playing a special. Most decks will play specials. And if you know they're not going to play a special, say they're a Renfri deck, you can just flip this on their first unit and get some value that way. Although you don't really want to be doing that. But the fact that it's when they play a special destroys their highest enemy, destroying the highest enemy is actually a good effect. Like Curse of Corruption's played, that's 9 provisions, this is 7. So Serpent Trap actually is pretty solid. Yeah, it's just overall pretty solid if you're playing a deck that wants to play the artifacts. Next up, we have the Echo card, Shaping Nature. So this is a 8 provision special. That's Echo. You can get one of these 3 choices, either 7 in Veil, 9, or 6 and 6 Vitality. Obviously, they have different utilities. One's the biggest point slam, one has the most value over time, one has the Veil. Unfortunately, this just doesn't make the cut. It's weak. There's better natures to do. There's better things to play in natures than this. So this is just going to fall down here, unfortunately. And the only deck that really won't ever want this is Symbiosis. It doesn't make the cut there, so I think this is definitely weak. I think it got buffed. Maybe you'd consider it, but I still don't know. Then it'd be competing with Frog Mating Season, and the comparison there is just so much in Frog Mating Season's favor. Well, they do work well together. Next up, we have Sheldon. He is the payoff card, one of the payoff cards for hand buff, along with Aglace. So he damages the enemy by the amount he is boosted. He boosts him up by 20 points. He does 20 damage, and there is your big point slam finisher. Gonna slot right in alongside Aglace. They're just both payoffs. They're both double up payoffs under your buffs, hand buffs, just for different applications. Like I said, hand buff is not the best deck, but they're very important to it. Next up, we have Simlos. Simlos is arguably one of the. Is this the best card in the faction? Just the best gold in the faction. I think it is. I think Sinloss is the best Scoia'tael gold card. So 1 for 13, and he plays all copies of a bronze special from your deck. This is the reason you can make decks like Waylays, the reason you can do stuff like Quad Bountiful Harvests. If you put more than 2 copies in your deck, it's still playing all the copies. And even if it's only playing 2 copies of a card, that's a double thin that usually plays for good tempo. Simloss is incredible. The only reason decks don't play Simloss is either because they're playing some kind of combo, like maybe Dwarves won't play them all the time, but even then you have Armor's Workshop combo. Like the only deck that doesn't want to play this is one that's playing Renfree most of the time. Just put them up here. It's just so good. And the fact that he plays any bronze special means you can just put the specials in that synergize with your deck and have access to them. Such an impactful card, so flexible, it goes pretty much everywhere. Something that doesn't do any of those things, though, is Sarissa. Or Sursa. I guess it's Sarissa. I always thought there was another I in here. Sursa. So 4 for 7 with Harmony. Do 2 damage and boost the unit in your hand by 2. And if it was Deathblow, you get to pick the unit, otherwise it is random. The value is just not here. It's total of 8 for 7, that's not good. Even hand buff doesn't play this. This is a bad card. This definitely has to be buffed if it's going to see play. 4 power in a Harmony engine is just weak. The damage, Harmony doesn't really need the damage. If it did want the damage, you'd play like Etriel Morelga or something. It's also bad in Harmony because most of the Harmony stuff are Dryads. In fact, this is also a Dryad, makes it like, doesn't trigger them. So it's just not it. Next up, we have Sticky Situation. This is one I used to write, would probably write off earlier as a worse card. Not like recently, like a year ago, whenever it came out. But it has some use. So when your opponent passes, your opponent plays you with 4 less power, you flip this, and then you boost the Jace units by 2. So this is 4 points a turn round 1, but it goes down each round. So it's 4 points a turn, then 2 points a turn, and then 0. However, the fact that it does 6 boosts on a hand and lock yourself, this is a hand buff card. You can play this for 6 hand buff. Because it's that, I'm going to stick it in niche. It's alongside the Prism Necker. Thinking about my deck. So the Prism Pendant type of specificity. It's very niche to certain decks that want to either play Golden Necker hand buff. That's why I put it next to Pendant. You can play Golden Necker hand buff. This is your hand buff big card then. You can replay it with things like Yorvith. Otherwise, you can play this in an early round to get those 4 points per turn going. But outside of that early round, it just falls off so much. But because of the Golden Necker hand buff, I think we'll have to put this one in the niche, because I do see that occasionally. Next up, we have Care. Oops. This one's not a Care. This one is Striga Castle. Stiga Castle. Stiga Castle. So 8 provisions is Resilience. Spawns one of the Cat Witchers. Now, its activated effect is move 3 units. The only reason you would use this is in the movement deck because it moves 3 guys. So it triggers the movement 3 times. So it's going to go alongside with the other ones here. They're all pretty integral to the deck, so I'm going to stick them together. It's not like any of them are weaker than the other ones, I think. Well, obviously, like these are the big payoff cards, but you kind of need them all. The card that everyone forgets to use. Telion Ape Colin. So 8 for 13. Deploy, shuffle a unit with 9 or less provisions into your deck and play the top elf with a deploy. Now, this I have seen at least one time because of the Hostage Taker spam deck. This lets you replay the Yorvith to make the Hostage Takers bigger. Now, is that great? Not really. And not even all the Hostage Taker spam decks play this. I only saw it once. So it has spawn and play backup plan. If this unit is doomed, I should say, damage the enemy unit by number of doomed units you control. So this is supposed to combo with Cargos, right? Because you can replay this to use this effect again. Then it's doomed when you use the order. It is a fantastic cargo target because you get the deploy effect again, and you can use the order again. And then the order won't play the backup plan the second time. However, this is just a weak card, I think. If we compare this to Simloss, they're both 13, there's a world of difference. I don't think I'm going to put it all the way in bad at the moment, just because I saw it at least one time. But it's not doing much. Next up, we have Great Oak. Great Oak, my favorite card in the game. 9 for 12, and it damages enemy unit by the number of cards left and boosts by the number of cards to the right. So it has flexibility. It's a row payoff. It's got 9 value on it. It's a mid-range card, so it maxes out at 17 total value. 17 for 12, that's pretty reasonable. And it has access to 8 damage sometimes. Overall, I think Great Oak is pretty solid. It's really only played in Scoia'tael mid-range, though. It is a good card in that deck. I wouldn't really cut it for anything else. But I'm going to stick it up here in good. I think it's good because of that. I think it is good. I'm glad it found a home after Oak Critters got buffed, and now you can play it in there. Next up, we have... You can also consider it in a Symbiosis if you want to be a little spicy and play this. Next up, we have Torque. Torque is the hand buff card, right? Like, Torque is the hand buff card. You cannot play hand buff without Torque. It starts in your hand every game. Bam. Automatically, the ultimate consistency. Not even Jan Kalwait can do that. He can almost do it, but he can't quite do it. You have to start at the top of your deck. So, or at least close to the top of your deck. So, Torque starts in your hand, and whenever it's boosted, it puts the same amount of boost on something else. It doubles up your boost. Going right in here with these guys. All the hand buffers. Is definitely the deck-defining card for hand buff, but like I said, hand buff's just down here. Next up, we have Toruviel. So, she's 4 for 8 damage to you. Toruviel. Is it just an Elf Swarm thing again? Like, the Elf Swarm is so bad. And even if you're not... Like, let's say you have an Elven Deadeye, you combine both abilities. 4 damage from her melee is 8 or 4 is not great. The row damage isn't great either. You combine them, sure, let's say they have 9 units. She's pulling 8 damage plus 1 to the whole row. That is, or 8 total value plus 9. So she's playing for 17. But if they have an entire row of units, Lacerate plays for 18. And no one plays Lacerate. So this is really just the only thing you got going for her is the fact you can use the Cargos from Heist on her, and there's just better cards. Like, there's just better options. This is just weak. It doesn't have a spot right now in the decks. Next up, we have Treant Boar. I think Treant Boar is all right, actually. I do like him. I just like all the Treants for some reason. So, 6 for 6. If you have a Dryad, gain Zeal. Ranged, move melee and do 2 damage. And melee, remove ranged and heal. This is one of my favorite designs for a card also, because it's very neat. Like, it charges in and it retreats to heal. It's super cool design. It's 2 damage every other turn, and movement you can make it every turn. Usually this is an alright option for your decks. You can play this at 6 revisions if you want to. I think right now Etriel Morella are a little bit better at 6, but if you can fit them all in, if you want to play this for the little bit extra damage, I think it's alright to consider playing him. He's got some good, decent value on him. You know what doesn't, though, is this card, Mantis Stalk. Quickly, comment, just do me a favor, guys. If you do not remember this card exists, comment something about Mantis Stalk not existing in the comments, because I want to know. So, this is ambush where your opponent plays a unit, it poisons it, and transforms into a 6-power guy. This is going straight down to this trash tier down here in meme. I mean, this might even be worse than the Runestone. 6 for 6 is awful, and poison a random unit. It's essentially random, because your opponent gets to pick the card they play. Traps don't play poisons. Traps use their traps for damage and control. Traps don't play poisons, which means it has no synergy with its own faction. The decks that play poisons are Harmony, and this is not a unit. I don't know what else to say. This has no synergies that make any sense. It's a cool card, but it just doesn't work. Next up, we have Vanadane. So he lets you move 2 cards from your hand to the bottom of your deck, and then replace it with Waylays. This is how you get more Waylays in your deck. Waylays are pretty good. This is the reason, like, you can play Heist decks. You do not need to play him. You can play Waylays without Heist, but you can't really play them without Vanadane. You can also play decks that rely on Heist that aren't Waylay trap decks. I think we're going to stick him up here in the deck-defining tier. Yeah, I think he is deck-defining. Excellent card. I think I like that. Super strong. For Nausiel, kind of the same deal. So she does, each of your Deadeyes do 2 damage. Any deck that spams Deadeyes traps, you convert with Eldain, you do this. You play the Waylay deck. After you play Waylays, you do this. Even in like the Precision Strike versions, you still play here for this. Although not always there, because you don't always have the Deadeyes from the leader, for example, but I think I'll still put her up here. She's very good. And even outside of those decks, she's still playing for 11 for 11. It's 3 bodies. It's not great, but if you've played an Angus or something, like there's still value in her. Next up, we have Water. Water of Brokilon at 9. So it spawns 2 fledglings, which are Harmony engines. It gives you 2 engines and 10 tempo. That's nice. I just don't think it is. It's nice, but usually you're not doing it. How do we think about this? It's at 9, so you can technically make a Golden Necker deck with it, but I haven't really seen anyone do that. Harmony is just not great at the moment. And this is not a card you even always see in Harmony, although I like to play it. I think it fits in here. You can play outside of Harmony too. Like I play this in Scoia'tael Midrange Devotion because you have a couple different unit tags in there. So I think it's pretty good, but usually you don't see it too often outside of Harmony. But you can play outside of Harmony like I do. So I think I'll put this one in good. Next up we have the Weeping Willow. Harmony melee is an order where it gets a bunch of points, and ranged is poison enemy. Usually you play it ranged, and then if you're playing Girl Tactics, you move it melee and click the order. Overall, it's pretty good, along with Percival. Like this, it's good. It lets you enable the poison package. Next up, we have this guy, whose name I forget. Xavier Moren. So 5 for 7. Whenever you play a dwarf, he gains an armor, and his barricade gain a point. This is just not worth it in the modern day. Like 1 point per turn engines are in 4 for 4 bronzes, not 5 for 7 golds. So this card is quite bad. Which is a shame. We used to play him. Next up, we have Yavin. Yavin is good. Like, Yavin's a good card to pay off your Waylays, pay off all your guys. He damages the enemy by the number of elves on his row. He does count himself for that, so keep that in mind. Overall, you usually get like 6 damage out of him at least, which is pretty solid. I'm going to say he's pretty good at the end of the day here. Alongside Isengrim. Like, they're both good in the same deck, right? Next up, we have... Oh, this guy's cool. It's not Dennis. What's the other one? What's the other guy's name? I'm going to remember in a second here. No, I didn't. How did I forget Yarpen Zigrin's name? How did I forget Yarpen? Oh, well. 6 for 9, does 3 damage, and Barricade, lose armor, and boost self by that much. So he's a way to pay off your armor. Generally, however, Dennis and Marauders are better ways to do that than putting the armor on him, because he goes really tall. And if you're... Yeah. His value just on play is 9 for 9. He's just not good at the moment. He's weak. No, he's not here. He's below weak, I think. Yeah, he definitely needs to be buffed. Next up, we have Zoltan Shive. Probably have a couple Zoltans here. So, Zoltan Shive. 5 for 9 with 4 armor, resilience, and boost adjacent dwarves by 2. So it's 9 for 9 on deploy if you got dwarves with resilience. Overall, that is pretty good. It's a good dwarf card. Yeah, I think it's good. I wouldn't say it's top tier, but it can fit in your Golden Necker dwarves with Gabor and such. So overall, I think he's better though, because he's harder to remove because of that 4 armor. And you can take advantage of this armor on the armor synergies, get more value in deploy. So I think he's a little bit better. Next up, we have Zoltan Warrior. 4 for 13. He does 2 damage. Sorry, he does 3 damage to 2 units. So that's 10 value. Then he spawns a dwarf for each one that survived. So usually you do this to spawn 2 dwarves. So that's 6 damage. You spawn 4 value of tokens. That's 14. Then he has Barricade, deal over damage if he's got armor. 1 random damage. So he's a 1 point per turn ping engine that plays for 14. That is very good tempo. Very good setup for stuff like your row-based effects. Just overall, very good card. You get him played alongside Udora quite a bit outside of dwarves just because they're a good tempo package for something like Renfrey. And last here we have Zoltan's Company. Spawn 2 dwarves on a row, increase by the number of Zoltans in your deck. So you can kind of see here, you can get up to 3 Zoltans, 5 Dwarves. This is how you set up Breuver. So it's going to go right next to Breuver. Well, you don't really need to. I think it's good. You can play the Dwarfs in Breuver without Zoltan's company if you don't want to play the Zoltans. Usually you're going to play it though. I think it's pretty good. So that's the tier list for the Scoia'tael Golds. Let's look over this really quickly and see if we have any things to say here. These are all very, very impactful. I think I'm going to drop Frakesnit down to good. Yeah, I don't know about this one. These kind of go together, right? Because you're only playing Devotion because you get both of their effects. Although I have seen Devotion without him. I'm going to leave them together up here, I think. I think Devotion Symbiosis is not as good as non-Devotion, but it's good enough, I think. It's pretty close. These guys are all decent. I don't know if I want to rate the Trap deck this highly. But, I mean, these do define different decks. This isn't the same deck as this. This has several decks. This is with the Vanadane. Yeah, I guess we'll put this here. We're not ranking them within the tiers. Just keep that in mind. Yeah, these all make sense. I don't want to drop the Harmony cards into the niche tier. So I think Harmony is better than these other decks. Like, I think it's better than Hand Buff. Significantly better than Hand Buff. It does really well against Hand Buff, too, because of the poisons. It's better than Movement Engine Overload. It's better than Traps. Yeah, I think Harmony is like the worst deck we'll consider putting in cards from in here. As far as good cards, yeah, these make sense. Like, this isn't deck defining. You just put it in because it's good. Oak's never, like, spectacular. It's at most, it's just, like, good because you get the good value from it. You can remove something. I think I like these. I think I'll put you by the other Harmonies down here. Maybe Gabor. Like I said, I don't know too much about Gabor. Maybe we should move him up. Niche. I'm happy with these being niche. That's for sure. No, this is... I want to be nice to Gambit, but the thing with Yorvit's Gambit is Reardane is tutoring a traps for you way better than this does. So I think it has to go down here because of that. The Reardane comparison is just not even close. You pay 1 extra provision, and then you get pretty much every time get a unit and a trap, and you can replay this with cargo. I think we should put this in weak, though. As much as I dislike this, I will say with Alzur's recent buff, and this being a spell, I can't discount it this much. So I will put it in weak for now, on the condition I haven't tried out too much. But I think this will be the final tier list rankings. Yeah, this will be the Scoia'tael Golds. Let me know what you guys think. Where was I wrong? Where was I right? Probably a lot of places we can disagree, since a lot of these cards, like I said, can move up or down a tier. If you consider Harmony not good enough, you just toss all these cards down like Niche or something. Maybe you only want to put 1 card from each deck up here. I don't know. But overall, I think this is what I'm pretty happy with. Hope you guys enjoyed, and we'll see you in the next one.
That'll be it for this one, guys. Hope you enjoyed. We'll see you next time. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more. And you can check out some more videos over here. And thanks for watching.